Welcome to a deep dive into the life of, well, I guess you could say a tech icon, Steve Jobs. We're going to be jumping into Walter Isaacson's biography, which, is really something special because Jobs was super involved in its creation.
Yeah,
Pretty rare to get that kind of insight into someone's life, right?
definitely. It's like getting a firsthand account from the man himself.
Exactly. So we get to really see into his mind what made him tick, what he wanted to leave behind.
Right, his legacy. And it's clear from the start, this guy, he wanted to build something that would last, something that would, outlive him, like those companies he admired, like Hewlett-Packard.
Yeah, that's a good point. He had this drive to create something that would embody that spirit of innovation, to be a real game changer.
Absolutely. And that desire for a lasting impact, it kind of jumps out at you from the very first pages.
Like he knew somehow that he needed to make his mark on the world.
Almost like a premonition.
Yeah, a bit eerie when you think about it like that. So to understand where that drive comes from, let's rewind a bit. Back to his childhood. 1950s Silicon Valley. That's got to be a pretty unique place to grow up, right? I mean, how do you think that environment shaped him?
Well, you can't talk about Steve Jobs without talking about his adoptive father, Paul. Paul was a mechanic, and he really instilled in Steve this love for tinkering, like taking stuff apart, figuring out how it works, putting it back together.
That makes sense. It's like the foundation for everything he did later on.
Totally. They'd go to junkyards, scavenging for parts. And even when they were fixing up, like, beat-up cars, Paul was all about doing it right. Attention to detail.
It wasn't just fixing a car. It was about craftsmanship.
Yeah, and you can see that in everything Jobs did later. Like with Apple, it wasn't just about building something that worked.
It had to be beautiful, had to be elegant, it had to be well crafted.
Exactly. And there's this other influence kind of woven into the landscape, the architecture. Jobs grew up surrounded by these Eichler homes. Those houses known for their clean lines, modern design.
I've seen those. Very, California modern.
Exactly. It's like good taste was just part of the environment. So you have that influence, too, this appreciation for beauty and functionality right there in his daily life.
It's wild how these seemingly random things from his childhood, like tinkering with his dad and seeing those houses, all come together in his work later.
It's like a blueprint.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of blueprints, there's this crazy story about him getting a summer job at, wait for it, Hewlett-Packard.
Oh, yeah. Classic Jobs.
So this is when he's a teenager. And he calls Bill Hewlett himself, like cold calls him, to ask for parts for a frequency counter he was building.
Talk about guts. Most teenagers wouldn't even think to do that.
I know, right? And get this, not only does he get the parts, but he also gets a job on the assembly line.
It's like he's just willed it into existence.
Yeah, like he had this unwavering belief in himself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, in the book, it talks about how his supervisor there was kind of jaded, disillusioned.
And they're too long, maybe.
But Jobs, he was the opposite.
Yeah.
Soaking it all up, totally enthusiastic.
He saw something in those machines, something exciting, something with potential.
It's almost like he could see the future of technology taking shape right there. So, okay, we have this foundation of mechanics, design, a sprinkle of youthful confidence, and then he goes to college, right? Reed College. And things get a little interesting.
It's the counterculture era. You can't underestimate the impact of that time on his life.
Right, so he drops out of Reed, but keeps auditing classes that intrigue him, starts experimenting with psychedelics, explores Eastern spirituality, dives headfirst into this whole world that's all about questioning everything.
He was searching for meaning, for enlightenment, for something more than what the traditional path offered.
It's a pretty big shift from building electronics in a garage, right? But even in this, countercultural phase, there are echoes of that early fascination with simplicity.
Absolutely. He was drawn to ideas that stripped away the unnecessary, that focused on the essence of things, that pursuit of simplicity, of clarity. It's like a thread that runs through his entire life.
And his design philosophy. I mean, he wanted to create products that were not just functional, but also beautiful and intuitive.
Almost like a form of enlightenment through technology.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And speaking of shared pursuits, there's his friendship with Daniel Kotke. They were both super into Zen Buddhism, Bob Dylan, expanding their consciousness.
Yeah, they even built a meditation space in an attic crawl space. It wasn't just a passing fad for them, it was a way of life.
It shows a real commitment. And then there's his trip to India.
The legendary India trip. He goes searching for a guru, ends up pursuing enlightenment through asceticism, and comes back with a shaved head and wearing traditional Indian clothing.
It's like a scene from a movie. But seriously, that experience, it really solidified his lifelong pursuit of that minimalist, Zen-inspired design that became like Apple's signature.
It's amazing how these experiences, which seem so far removed from technology, end up shaping his entire approach to design. It's like he found a way to bridge the gap between the spiritual and the material.
Yeah, he brought those two worlds together in a way that was totally unique. And even before Apple officially started, you can see that entrepreneurial spirit, that drive to create, to disrupt.
You're talking about the blue boxes, right?
Exactly. He and Wozniak built these devices that let people make free long-distance calls. It was genius, really. A blend of technical skill and, let's face it, a little bit of mischief.
It was totally rebellious, and you can see how that spirit of challenging the rules would define his later career. It wasn't just about making money, it was about empowering people, giving them access to something that was previously out of reach. It was hacking the system, in a way. Yeah. Exactly. And it was the start of this incredible partnership between Jobs and Wozniak. They were a perfect match, a yin and yang of tech. Jobs had the vision, the drive, the charisma, while Wozniak was the engineering wizard, the guy who could actually build the things Jobs dreamed up.
A dynamic duo. And that leads us to, of course, the birth of Apple and the creation of the Apple II. It was one of the first commercially successful personal computers, and even in those early days, Jobs was obsessed with making it user-friendly.
He understood that computers couldn't stay stuck in the realm of hobbyists and engineers. To reach a wider audience, they needed to be accessible, easy to use, even, dare I say, visually appealing.
It had to be something people actually wanted to invite into their homes.
Exactly. He wanted to democratize technology, to make it available to everyone, not just the tech elite.
And then, of course, there's the Macintosh. This is where Apple's design philosophy really crystallizes. Jobs takes this initial concept from Jeff Raskin for a user-friendly computer and just runs with it.
Yeah, he had this laser focus on creating something truly revolutionary. He assembled this team of brilliant but often intimidated engineers, and he pushed them hard, like really hard.
There are legendary stories about the long hours, the intense pressure, the, let's call it passionate debates.
It was during this time that the myth, or maybe reality, of Jobs's reality distortion field took hold.
Reality distortion field. That sounds intense. What exactly was that?
Well, it was this almost supernatural ability Jobs had to convince himself and everyone around him that anything was possible. He'd bend facts, manipulate timelines, and just will things into existence. It was a potent mix of charisma, willpower, and a flexible relationship with the truth.
So it was both inspiring and, well, kind of terrifying.
Yeah, definitely a double-edged sword. It could push people to achieve incredible things, but it could also be overwhelming, even manipulative.
It's fascinating how he could be both brilliant and incredibly difficult at the same time. But even amid all the chaos and intensity, he never lost sight of those core design principles: simplicity and an intuitive user experience. He wanted to strip away complexity and make technology that was both beautiful and easy to use.
It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about understanding how people interact with machines, how to make that interaction seamless and enjoyable.
It's like he was saying, technology shouldn't be intimidating. It should be elegant. It should be accessible. It should be human.
Exactly. He wanted to make technology that felt like an extension of our own thoughts and creativity.
And his famous quote, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." It sums that up perfectly. Yeah. And it's interesting how his admiration for Dieter Rams and those sleek Braun products, with their clean lines and functional elegance, really influenced Apple's aesthetic.
Yeah, he saw beauty in objects that served a purpose. No unnecessary frills, just pure form and function. That's what he wanted for Apple.
It's clear that his vision was deeply rooted in this idea that good design can make technology not just functional, but truly delightful to use. But, as we all know, his journey wasn't all smooth sailing. In fact, his intense focus on the Macintosh and maybe his, shall we say, forceful personality led to some serious tension within Apple.
Right. He was passionate, but that passion could sometimes spill over into conflict.
And ultimately, it led to his ouster from the company he founded, which is a story for another time. It's hard to imagine, being kicked out of the company you built from the ground up. I mean, Jobs must have been devastated.
Yeah, it was a huge blow. But even in exile, Jobs, he didn't just disappear. He started an XT, this computer company focused on high-end workstations, for universities and businesses.
He was always pushing the boundaries, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Even when things were rough. So these XT computers, were they just like fancy PCs, or was there something more to them?
Oh, they were way ahead of their time. Sleek design, of course, that was a given with Jobs. But the real magic was the operating system. Next C step. It was revolutionary, a totally different way of thinking about software.
In what way?
Well, it was object-oriented, which was pretty new back then, and it had these incredibly powerful development tools, plus a really elegant user interface. It was the foundation for a lot of the innovations that would later show up in Mac OS X.
So even when he was away from Apple, he was laying the groundwork for his return. It's like he was playing the long game.
Exactly. He was building a software ecosystem that would prove to be incredibly valuable down the road. And it wasn't just NXT. During this time, he also acquired a little company you might have heard of, Pixar.
Oh yeah, the animation studio. That was a pretty smart move considering how successful they became.
It was. Jobs had this vision for Pixar. He saw the potential in computer animation, not just for kids' movies, but as a new art form, a new way of storytelling.
He was always a few steps ahead, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So what was his role at Pixar? Was he like a hands-on manager or did he give the creatives free rein?
It's a little bit of both, actually. At first, he was more focused on the business side of things, funding, strategy, that sort of stuff. But he was also deeply involved in the creative process, working closely with John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, the guys who really shaped Pixar's style. His attention to detail, his push for quality, it all helped create the Pixar we know and love today.
It's like he took those same principles he applied to Apple, that obsession with design and innovation, and brought them to the world of animation. He was a master of cross-pollination.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to blur the lines between different industries. He saw the connections, the potential for synergy that others missed. And while Jobs was off building these empires, Apple was, well, not doing so great. Their market share was shrinking, their products were getting stale, they needed a shakeup.
And who better to shake things up than the guy who started it all? It's like a prodigal son story. Did they welcome him back with open arms?
It was a little more complicated than that. There were still some hard feelings from his departure, but they knew they needed him. They needed his vision, his energy, his ability to make things happen.
And he was ready for a comeback, right? To reclaim his throne.
Oh, yeah, he came back with a vengeance. He streamlined the product line, cut costs, and most importantly, he brought back that focus on innovation and design that had made Apple great in the first place.
And that's when the hits started rolling out, right? The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. It's like he unleashed this torrent of creativity. How did he do it? I mean, was it just him, or was there something about the culture at Apple that he was able to tap into?
It was a combination of things, definitely. He had this incredible team, people who were as passionate as he was, and he fostered this culture of excellence, of pushing boundaries, of not settling for anything less than the best. But at the heart of it all was Jobs. He had this uncanny ability to see the future, to understand what people wanted before they even knew it themselves.
Like he had a crystal ball or something. So let's talk about those hits. The iMac, for example, it was a radical departure from the boring beige boxes everyone else was making. I remember seeing those colorful iMacs in stores, and it was like, whoa, this is different.
It was like a breath of fresh air. It was playful, approachable, almost whimsical. Jobs understood that computers didn't have to be these intimidating machines. They could be objects of desire, something you'd actually want to display in your home.
They were more like pieces of furniture than technology.
Exactly. And then there was the iPod. It was more than just a music player. It was a cultural phenomenon. It changed the way we listened to music, the way we thought about portable devices.
I remember getting my first iPod, and it was like, this is the future. It was so sleek, so intuitive, and the sound quality was amazing. It was like having your entire music collection in your pocket.
And it wasn't just the hardware, it was the whole ecosystem. iTunes, the iPod, this seamless integration between them, that was Jobs' genius. He understood that to create a truly great user experience, you had to control the entire chain.
It was a closed system, which some people criticized, but it was also what allowed Apple to create such a polished, user-friendly experience. It just worked, and that was a big part of its appeal.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the iPhone, the device that changed everything.
The iPhone was more than just a phone. It was a pocket-sized computer, a communication device, a multimedia hub. It was like having the world at your fingertips.
It redefined what a mobile phone could be, and it set the standard for the smartphone industry. Even today, every smartphone owes a debt to the iPhone.
It's crazy to think how much of our lives now revolve around these devices. And it all goes back to Jobs and his vision. He was obsessed with getting every detail right, There's that story about him scrapping months of work on the iPhone design because he didn't like the feel of the buttons.
That was Jobs in a nutshell. He wouldn't compromise, not even on the smallest details. It had to be perfect or wasn't good enough. And that's what made him so demanding, so difficult to work with. But it's also what drove him to achieve such incredible things.
And let's not forget the iPad. When it first came out, a lot of people were like, what is this? A giant iPhone.
Yeah.
But Jobs saw something more. He saw the potential for a new kind of computing experience, something more intimate, more immersive.
Yeah, he envisioned it as a device for consuming content, for browsing the web, for reading, for playing games. He saw it as a more natural way to interact with digital media.
And, of course, he was right. Tablets are everywhere now, and the iPad is still the leader of the pack. It's another example of Jobs seeing the future before anyone else.
It's like he had this sixth sense for understanding how technology would evolve, how people would use it, and what they would want.
He wasn't just building products. He was shaping the way we lived, the way we interacted with the world. And that's what makes his story so compelling. But, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Jobs had his demons, his personal struggles that, unfortunately, played out in public sometimes.
Yeah, his relationship with his daughter, Lisa, was especially difficult. He denied paternity for years. And even when he acknowledged her, he could be distant and, well, let's just say he wasn't always the best father.
It's a reminder that even brilliant people are human, that they make mistakes, that they have flaws. And then there was his battle with cancer. That must have been incredibly difficult for him, both physically and emotionally.
It was. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003, and he fought it for years. Initially, he resisted conventional medical treatment, which he later regretted. He eventually had surgery and other treatments, but the cancer kept coming back.
It's amazing that he was able to keep going, to keep innovating, while dealing with such a serious illness. It shows his incredible willpower.
He was a fighter. And he said that his cancer diagnosis made him realize what was truly important in life. It made him focus on his legacy, on the things that would endure.
It's a powerful reminder that we're all mortal, that our time is limited, and that we should make the most of it. So Jobs was this complex figure, a mix of brilliance, ambition, and, let's face it, some pretty serious flaws. But his impact on the world is undeniable. He changed the way we think about technology, the way we use it, the way we live our lives.
He was a true visionary. He wasn't afraid to push boundaries, to break the rules, to think differently, and he inspired countless others to do the same.
He showed us that anything is possible if you have the passion, the drive, and the willingness to take risks. And that's a legacy that will continue to inspire generations to come. But Jobs' vision wasn't just limited to products. He understood that the entire experience mattered, from the way products were designed to the way they were sold. And that led him to revolutionize retail with the creation of Apple stores.
Yeah, before Apple stores, buying a computer was usually a pretty dreadful experience. You'd go to some big box store, be confronted with this sea of generic PCs, and then try to make sense of all the technical jargon.
It was like trying to navigate a maze. And the salespeople were often more interested in pushing a sale than actually helping you find the right product.
Jobs saw an opportunity to change that. He wanted to create a retail experience that was as elegant and intuitive as Apple's products.
And he did. Apple stores are like these minimalist temples of technology.
Yeah.
They're bright, airy, and inviting. And the staff is actually knowledgeable and helpful.
The Genius Bar was a stroke of genius. It was a place where you could go to get expert help with your Apple products, no matter how simple or complex the problem. It was about creating a relationship with the customer, not just a transaction.
And it worked. Apple stores became some of the most profitable retail spaces in the world. They redefined what a retail experience could be. It's amazing how Jobs was able to take those same principles of design and user experience and apply them to something as seemingly mundane as retail.
He saw the potential everywhere. And he wasn't afraid to experiment, to try new things, to break the mold. And then there's the iTunes Store. It completely revolutionized the music industry. At a time when the music industry was struggling to adapt to the digital age, Jobs came in with this bold new vision.
The music industry was in chaos. Piracy was rampant, CD sales were plummeting, and no one knew what the future held.
Jobs saw an opportunity to create a legal, easy-to-use platform where people could buy and download music for a reasonable price. And he made it work.
iTunes was simple, elegant, and it integrated seamlessly with the iPod. It made buying and managing digital music a breeze.
And it legitimized digital music distribution. It showed the music industry that there was a way to adapt to the digital age, to embrace new technologies without losing control. Of course, it was still a closed ecosystem, but in this case, it worked. Jobs was able to strike deals with record labels, create a user-friendly interface, and offer a compelling alternative to piracy.
It was a win-win. Consumers got a great way to buy music, and the music industry got a lifeline. It's fascinating how Jobs was able to disrupt industries that were seemingly unrelated to his core expertise. He brought his design sensibilities, his business acumen, and his understanding of the consumer to retail, music, and even animation.
He was a master of disruption. He saw the flaws in existing systems, the inefficiencies, the missed opportunities, and he wasn't afraid to shake things up, to offer a new way of doing things.
He was a true innovator, a game changer, and his legacy continues to shape the world we live in today. Okay, so we've talked about Jobs the man, the myth, the legend, but what about Jobs the legacy? I mean, what's the lasting impact beyond all the cool gadgets?
Well, it's hard to overstate his influence, really, not just on tech, but on design, on business, on how we think about innovation itself.
He was like a one-man revolution, wasn't he? Always pushing the boundaries, always thinking differently.
Yeah, he had this uncanny ability to see what was possible, to imagine things that others couldn't even fathom.
And he wasn't afraid to fail, to experiment, to iterate until he got it right.
Exactly. He was relentless in his pursuit of perfection, which, could be frustrating for those around him. But it also led to some truly groundbreaking products.
Products that changed the world, no doubt. But I'm also thinking about his design philosophy, that focus on simplicity, elegance, user experience. It's everywhere now, isn't it?
It's become the gold standard, really. Jobs understood that technology should be intuitive, accessible, even beautiful. He wanted to create products that people love to use, not just tolerated.
And he was a master storyteller, too.
Yeah.
He knew how to create a narrative around his products, to make them more than just objects. They were symbols of something bigger, of creativity, of connection, of breaking free from the status quo.
He tapped into something deep in the human psyche, that desire to be part of something special, something that makes you feel empowered, connected, even a little bit rebellious.
He made technology cool, aspirational, almost like a fashion statement.
Exactly. But, there's also that other side of Jobs, the control freak, the guy who insisted on building these closed ecosystems. He wanted to control every aspect of the user experience, from the hardware to the software to the content.
And it worked for him to a certain extent, but it also raises some questions about openness, about competition, about the potential for stifling innovation.
Right, and it's ironic, isn't it? Because his whole vision of the personal computer as this digital hub, this central point for managing our digital lives, it eventually gave way to the cloud, a decentralized system that embraces openness, collaboration, shared resources.
So the guy who built an empire on closed systems ends up paving the way for a more open, interconnected world. That's pretty wild when you think about it. It makes you wonder if he saw it coming, if he understood that the future of tech was heading in that direction.
It's hard to say, but Jobs was nothing if not adaptable. He was always learning, always evolving. Maybe he realized that even the most tightly controlled ecosystems need to adapt, to embrace change, to let go of the reins a little bit.
It's a fascinating paradox,
Yeah.
and it leads to an even bigger question. In a world that's increasingly defined by algorithms, AI, big data, is there still room for that kind of passionate, intuitive, sometimes even abrasive genius that Jobs embodied?
It's a debate that's still raging, I think. Some people argue that Jobs was a product of a particular time, that his style of leadership wouldn't fly in today's more collaborative, decentralized tech world. Others believe that his core values, his focus on vision, design, and user experience, are more relevant than ever, even if the specific technologies have changed.
It's a complicated legacy, for sure. But one thing's undeniable. Jobs left an indelible mark on the world. He changed the way we interact with technology, the way we think about it, the way we live our lives.
And he showed us that one person with a bold vision and an unwavering belief in themselves can truly change the world.
That's a pretty powerful message. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of Steve Jobs, I'm curious, what's the one thing that you'll take away from it? What resonated with you the most?
It's that reminder that true innovation, real breakthroughs, they often come from a place of passion, intuition, and a willingness to take risks. Jobs wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, to trust his gut, to go against the grain, and that's what made him so extraordinary.
That's a great takeaway. It's inspiring, really. It reminds us that we all have the potential to make a difference, to leave our mark on the world, even if it's in a small way. So thanks for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of Steve Jobs. We hope it sparked some new ideas, some fresh perspectives, and maybe even inspired you to go out there and make your own dent in the universe.